Greetings, weary travelers. They call me many things. The man, the myth, the mustache. But please, call me Tim. Why, you all seem to have been traveling for some time. Pull up a spot next to the fire and allow me to tell you all a tale. A tale of heroism. A tale of sacrifice and loss. You all have heard of this from the beginning. So allow me to give you the thrilling conclusion of what if Deku could use Haki. The battle was chaos, yet it was beautiful coordination. Midoriya was having a lethal and blood-stained duel with the monstrous Shigaraki, unable to afford letting the villain get even a split second of leeway. Night-Eye and Rayleigh were having a similar power struggle against Overhaul, but the cause of said struggle was different. The struggle between Midoriya and Shigaraki was that both were strong, and one was more reckless and destructive than the other. But for Night-Eye and Rayleigh's case, it was very different, for they weren't primarily focusing on Overhaul. They were focusing more on the child that was standing behind him, Eri. Uraraka watched both of the battles play out in front of her, clenching her hands in frustration as she did. She was useless. She couldn't do anything. Midoriya was fighting with his life on the line, and here she was doing nothing. The brown-haired girl grit her teeth, cursing her own weaknesses more than ever before.
We have to do something. I can't keep this up,
Asui said, knocking Uraraka back to reality. Asui was right, and Uraraka knew it. But what was it they could do? None of them had enough training to be able to fight. Even if they had the power, they definitely didn't have the experience. What could they do? The brown-haired girl kept observing the battle until her eyes locked onto Eri. The poor little girl was in the middle of this chaos, and her presence was hindering both Rayleigh and Night-Eye in their battle. That is when Uraraka got an idea, and she remembered what Midoriya had told them just minutes before. Save Eri and don't die. That is what Deku told us to do. Uraraka muttered, clenching her fists even harder as she did. Asui turned to look at her brown-haired friend, only to be surprised. Uraraka was both determined and angry. That much was clear on her expression. Then that is what we'll do, Mirio said, grunting in pain. Both Uraraka and Asui looked at the blonde worriedly, for he was standing up despite his injuries, but they quickly realized it would be foolish to stop him. They had a mission, to save Eri, and they needed Mirio's help to do so. Night-Eye and Rayleigh kept up their struggle against Overhaul. The villain wasn't just skilled with both his Haki and quirk, he was holding Eri hostage. They needed to get the girl out of harm's way if they wanted to be able to fight the villain. But doing so was easier said than done. The two heroes kept charging Overhaul, only to be pushed back by a swarm of Haki-infused spikes. The two would repeatedly avoid death from impalement. Rayleigh was losing his strength. His injury wasn't getting any better, and it was weakening him more by the second. He needed to end this quickly, before he dropped dead. The silver-haired man tried to make a run for it, but was stopped when he saw something flying past him in the corner of his eye. He turned towards it, only to see Mirio weightlessly flying with speed. Rayleigh didn't need to ask what he was doing, for it was obvious. The blonde was going straight for Eri, but doing that would be difficult with Overhaul constantly guarding. Rayleigh quickly glanced at Night-Eye, who nodded in response before they charged. Overhaul was about to do something about Mirio, but his attention turned quickly back to the two men charging at him. The villain was too busy fending off both Rayleigh and Night-Eye, which left an opening for Mirio to grab Eri. Now, Froppy! The blonde hero shouted, holding Eri tight in his arms. The frog girl acted, and quickly sent her tongue out to grab the weightless hero and child. It was working perfectly, until Overhaul had enough. He had had enough of this battle, and he wasn't going to let anyone take Eri away from him. The villain placed his hands on the ground before sending out a powerful wave. The wave reshaped the floor, causing it to turn uneven. It wasn't enough to hurt anyone, but it was enough to make Asui slip and lose her grip over Eri and Mirio. The two were now still in the air, as Overhaul made another move. Rayleigh could see what was going on. Overhaul was going to send a spike straight at the defenseless kids, and Mirio would get impaled in an attempt to protect Eri. Rayleigh needed to attack Overhaul before that happened, but he staggered in pain. His damage was finally reaching him, and he was on the verge of breaking. Mirio would die if he didn't do something, but he didn't have the strength left to fight. The silver-haired geezer thought it over heavily, until he clenched his fist tightly. He then looked over to Midoriya, who was still fighting Shigaraki, as he quietly muttered, "It's your turn now." Mirio began to panic, for he was in trouble. No more than a second after he stopped moving, He could see that Overhaul was going in for the kill. The blonde tried to move away, but didn't have enough time until the spikes came flying. Mirio turned his back to them, shielding Eri and waiting for the impact. But an impact never came. The blonde turned his gaze back towards Overhaul, only to find that his vision was blocked by something jarring. "No," he uttered painfully, as he fully analyzed the impaled old man that was in front of him. Rayleigh didn't have enough strength to continue fighting, but it was enough to stand and shield Mirio. The room suddenly stopped, as everyone looked towards the impaled old man. Everyone looked pained, but none of them were as affected as Midoriya. The green-haired boy painfully watched as his master stood, bloody impaled, yet still smiling through it. Rayleigh then looked towards Midoriya, giving him a wide grin, before his entire body fell limp. No one uttered a single word at this moment. No one even commented on what they just saw. They all knew what happened. Rayleigh's lifeless body was enough to show that. Midoriya felt an incredible pain in his heart, as tears flowed out of his eyes like rivers. "Rayleigh!" the green-haired boy shouted, painfully shrieking at the death of his master. Overhaul felt no remorse whatsoever, and began to act once again. This time, Night Eye continued attacking, distracting the villain so that Mirio could hopefully escape with Eri. The blonde could barely move, and no one else could get close enough to help him. Eri was within his arms, and she was scared. Not only were these people trying to help her, but one of them had died. Every unknown feeling was stirring up and pressuring Eri more and more until she finally let it all out. "No!" she bellowed, as a powerful wave engulfed everything around them. The world was both silent and still, leaving everyone in shock, until it returned to normal when the wave disappeared. Everyone's expression of shock stayed, as Overhaul suddenly fell to the floor, unconscious. No one knew how to react to this, for it wasn't something that any of them had expected. Eri wasn't just a girl that had been mistreated by a villain. She had the conqueror spirit as well. Midoriya was still in shock, staring at the frail girl, so he barely noticed the hand-covered villain that was sneaking up on him. The green-haired boy turned around, but it wasn't in time. Shigaraki was already inches away from wrapping his fingers around Midoriya, and there was barely anything he could do about it. The green-haired boy was helpless, and waited for him to suffer the same fate as his master. Then something quickly flew by, stopping Shigaraki in his tracks. The hand-covered villain then shrieked in agony as his left hand was severed and dropped to the floor. Midoriya was confused as he saw that it was Rayleigh's sword that had flown by and sliced off Shigaraki's hand. Midoriya turned in the opposite direction to see none other than Uraraka. She had thrown the sword with her quirk and saved Midoriya. The green-haired boy clenched his fist hard as he turned his ferocious expression toward Shigaraki. The hand-covered villain was still staggering from the pain, and Midoriya wasn't going to let him recover. The green-haired boy coated his arms with Haki before he threw a punch towards the villain. The fist stopped just millimeters away from the collision, but Midoriya hadn't pulled his punch. Shigaraki suddenly began to violently tremble as blood spewed out of his mouth. Everyone who was watching recognized that Midoriya had used Ryuo, but the green-haired boy wasn't done yet. He wound his other fist as far back as possible, taking the form of a discus thrower before shouting, "Red Hawk!" and sending a burning fist straight into Shigaraki's face. The villain was sent back in a fiery explosion before crashing into the ground with a loud bang. Midoriya showed almost no remorse at this point. He was just furious beyond recognition. The green-haired boy turned his back towards Shigaraki once more, only to immediately turn around and face him again. The villain wasn't finished. He was still standing in a final attempt to kill his opponent. He moved like he was possessed, ready to succumb to his injuries at any moment. Midoriya looked as unamused as ever, as he grabbed Shigaraki by the one hand he had left. They had their fingers locked, tightly gripping each other. The hand-covered villain grinned sadistically, for he could now use his quirk on Midoriya. The villain tried to spread his Haki-infused decay onto Midoriya, but quickly realized something. It wasn't working. The green-haired boy was completely unaffected. Shigaraki grunted in frustration until he realized what was stopping him.
"You brat! How is your Haki stronger than mine?"
The hand-covered villain shouted in anger as his grip tightened even more. Midoriya looked at the villain, recognizing him for the mad lunatic that he was, as he answered, "Did you honestly think that a novice such as yourself could ever hope to overpower me with Haki? Think again!" Shigaraki staggered upon hearing Midoriya's words. The green-haired boy spoke with such power such anger, such spirit, that Shigaraki couldn't help but tremble. The villain felt something that he had never felt before, something he wouldn't dare to accept. It was fear, and it came from Midoriya. The green-haired boy tightened his hold on Shigaraki, hearing nasty cracks as he did so, before saying, "This ends now!" Shigaraki felt how his hand was being torn to shreds as he launched his final desperate attempt. The villain fired his conqueror's Haki straight at Midoriya, hoping that it would defeat him. The green-haired boy didn't even budge, as he responded by using his own conqueror's spirit. Now it wasn't just Shigaraki that felt it, everyone was feeling it. The ground and walls were shaking, and the pressure was making it hard to both focus and stand up. It didn't take long for them to realize that this was Midoriya at his full power, when nothing was holding him back. Shigaraki was overwhelmed by the intense power, and quickly lost consciousness. Midoriya didn't stop emitting his spirit. He kept going as if there was still something that needed to be attacked. He kept going, and caused more and more damage as he did, losing more and more of his mind. He was overwhelming himself, just as he was his opponent. The spirit didn't stop, and things started to look bad. Midoriya was descending more and more into madness, losing more and more of his control. It was all about to peak for the worst, until something happened. Midoriya could feel something warm wrap itself around his body from behind, before it whispered, "It's okay, Deku. I'm here for you." Midoriya quickly realized that it was Uraraka, the only person that recognized how much pain he was in. The spiritual pressure weakened, until it disappeared completely. Midoriya let go of Shigaraki's completely destroyed hand before falling to his knees and crying his eyes out. What happened wasn't unexpected. He had just witnessed the death of his master. The fact that he had lost control wasn't abnormal, but everyone was lucky that he had gained control again before anyone else died. The green-haired boy kept crying his eyes out as reality settled within him. Uraraka didn't let go of him for even a second. She kept comforting him throughout the entire event. The raid ended as a success. The Shihasaikai had gotten taken down. Overhaul and Shigaraki were arrested, and Eri was saved. Rayleigh had been the only casualty, and everyone who stood close to him would mourn. There were a few problems to solve, however. Eri didn't just have an incredibly dangerous quirk, she had the Conqueror's spirit. In order to prevent an accident, she would need to be supervised and trained by someone who was qualified to deal with both her quirk and Haki. Aizawa was qualified for the quirk part, but the problem was the Haki portion. There were only two people who were qualified, Rayleigh and Midoriya. But Rayleigh was no longer with them, and Midoriya was absent-minded. The green-haired boy had gone into deep mourning after the raid, locking himself into his room while clutching Rayleigh's old sword to his chest. This wasn't something that could go on, for they needed him now more than ever. It wasn't just Eri, but it was also Kota who needed him. They both needed someone who could teach them about Haki, and help them become something great with it. But the green-haired boy never answered when someone called for him, and it was getting worrisome. Uraraka and the other members of Class 1A were all sitting in the living room together, discussing what to do. They were all worried for Midoriya. Even Bakugo was. But they didn't know what to do. It wasn't just his master that the green-haired boy had lost. He had completely lost his soul with him. The students kept discussing the matter until they were interrupted by the door opening. They all turned to see that it was Aizawa, Mandalay, and All Might, along with both Kota and Eri. They all looked surprised at first, but then realized they were going to try and talk to Midoriya. Aizawa carefully scanned his students before asking, "Is Midoriya still in his room?" Uraraka looked sad as she answered, "He hasn't left it yet." Aizawa sighed upon hearing this as he turned to the others and said, "Let's go check on him," before turning to walk towards Midoriya's room. The others nodded in agreement before following, until Kota suddenly stopped. Mandalay looked at Kota in confusion as the boy said, "He's not here." Everyone was even more confused now. What was it that Kota meant? "What do you mean, kid?" Aizawa asked, hoping to get an explanation. Kota looked at the teacher with a blank expression as he answered, "He's not here." Aizawa was even more confused now, trying to figure out what the kid was talking about. "He's right. Young Midoriya isn't anywhere near the building," All Might said, sounding a little worried. Aizawa looked at the blonde hero in shock, finally realizing what it meant. Class 1A grew weary, and those who could used observation Haki to see if it was true. And sure enough it was. Midoriya wasn't anywhere to be seen. "Where could he have possibly gone?" Aizawa shouted in a panic, almost fearing for the worst. Everyone else began to panic as well, until one voice spoke up. I think I might know where he's going, but I can't say for certain. Everyone turned to see it was Bakugo, and they could tell he wasn't angry or worried. One part of Aizawa was skeptical about this, but that side was completely drowned out with panic. All right, then lead the way, he shouted, showing just how serious of a matter this was. Bakugo obliged to his teacher's orders as he led them to the one place that he believed Midoriya would be. Midoriya was as absent-minded got. Even though he was outside, clearly active in reality, he couldn't make out what he was seeing. He only knew where he wanted to be, and he never doubted that he was getting there. But the world didn't look the same to him. The dirt on the ground felt weird, and the trees moved as if they were alive. The green-haired boy couldn't see reality for what it was. All he knew was that he held Rayleigh's sword, and that he wanted to go somewhere. Eventually, he came to a stop, and that is when reality started to look like its old self. He was in an open field in the woods, one that showed clear signs of human activity. The ground showed many footprints of different sizes, the trees were broken with the marks of fists, and all of the grass had been stomped out of existence. Midoriya immediately recognized this place, and he knew that he had reached his destination. This is where he and Rayleigh used to train, the place where his journey started. The green-haired boy kept observing the area, until he sensed something approaching him. Midoriya turned towards it, and saw a monstrous bear, the very same one he had tamed not too long ago. The beast recognized Midoriya, and looked sad as it approached him. So you heard the news, huh? Midoriya muttered, as he lightly patted the bear over the head. The beast responded by giving a weak grunt, which Midoriya took as a yes. Midoriya could feel the pain wash over him, along with the sadness. He couldn't accept it. He didn't want to accept it. Rayleigh was gone, and there wasn't anything he could do about it. I miss him. I miss him so much, Midoriya muttered painfully, as tears formed in his eyes. It's all right, Deku. We miss him too, a feminine voice said, almost startling Midoriya. The green-haired boy turned around, only to see Uraraka, along with Aizawa, All Might, Bakugo, Kota, Eri, and some other members of Class 1A. How did you find me? Midoriya asked, looking surprised. Uraraka gave Midoriya a gentle grin as she answered, You're not his only student, remember? Midoriya was still shocked, but not moving. It wasn't until Uraraka walked up and gently took his hands that he shivered, as she said, You're not alone, Deku. We're all here for you. We want to help you, and I don't think Rayleigh would want to see you like this. So please, stand up again. Midoriya could feel more tears well up inside him, but these weren't of sadness. He was happy that he was blessed to have so many people caring for him. He wiped his tears away before he said, Yeah, you're right. He probably would hit me if he saw me right now. Uraraka smiled upon hearing this before saying, Speaking of which, before bashing Midoriya over the skull. Ow, what was that for? Midoriya shouted, surprised that Uraraka could pack such a punch. The brown-haired girl didn't answer. She just started laughing. Midoriya looked at her confused, until he also joined in the laughter. It didn't take long before the rest of the group joined in, all unified once more. After it was over, Midoriya looked at the sword that was still in his hands, and decided on what to do. The green-haired boy walked to the middle of the small field before shoving the sword into the ground. The weapon stood up with its pommel facing the sky, erect from the ground like a gravestone. It's time I said my goodbyes, Midoriya said as he looked at the gravestone. Same here, Uraraka said as she walked up next to Midoriya. Same here, Bakugo said as he did the same. Not too long after, everyone was standing in front of the gravestone, holding hands as they bid their goodbyes to the man known as the Dark King, Silver's Rayleigh. Midoriya glanced at both Kota and Eri until he decided on something else. They needed training, and with Rayleigh gone, it was his responsibility to help them. Just like the old man once did to him, he will train them so that they could be whatever they wanted to be. Well, I think it's time we headed back, Aizawa said after a while, and everyone silently agreed. Everyone slowly made their way out of the forest, with Midoriya walking in the back. The green-haired boy stopped and took another glance at the gravestone he had set up for his master. If Rayleigh hadn't found him that day, he wouldn't have become what he was today. He wouldn't have had the chance to be a hero. He was thankful to him, and everything he had done. The green-haired boy looked at his master's gravestone one last time before leaving, but not before saying his final words. Thank you. Goodbye. And that's our story, everyone. I'm not gonna lie, I am actually crying right now while I'm recording this. Anyway, so that has been our series of What If Deku Could Use Haki. I hope you all have enjoyed the story. I really did enjoy it. And don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. I'm still gonna be with the Celestials for a while, so do not worry, I will be here. Anyway, before I go, let's clean house for a bit. First, we have a second channel called Anime Deep Dive. Anime Deep Dive goes over the hard facts and lore of a wide variety of anime, which is sure to expand your weeb knowledge of all kinds, guaranteed. On top of that, we have a third channel called We the Celestials Naruto What Ifs. It's what we do on this channel, but in the vast world and lore of Naruto. So go check that out if you're in the mood for some jutsu action. Secondly, on behalf of We the Celestials, I want to thank everyone involved in the production of today's awesome content. Even further, I want to thank everyone who helped make this series possible. Their details will be in the description below, as well as the previous videos, so give them some love, please. Finally, if you're interested in what we do here with the Celestials, I want to extend an invitation to join our team. We only have one caveat: you must be 16 years or older to join our crew. You can sign up for whichever category fulfills your interests by joining the recruitment Discord in the description below. Our Discord is an all-around fantastic place to be, whether you're a fan or you're looking to join our band of misfits. And so that's it for today's video, so thank you all for watching, and I do hope you have a great day. Before I go, I do have a message, and it's a little different than what my previous ones have been. Grief and loss are natural parts of life. So when you lose someone in your life, it's fine to grieve. It's fine to think back at the good times that you had with them, because when you think about them, when you keep them in your mind, they're never really gone. I do want to thank you all for listening and enjoying the series. You've all been fantastic. Mustache out.